Because British Columbia Premier David Eby is so vulnerable right now, as well as is rightfully viewed as one of the main champions of some of the most radical left wing policy currently ruining Canada, federal Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre seems to be making an example out of David Eby, because even though federal party leaders don't usually comment on what individual premiers are doing unless they also happen to be the prime minister at the time, Pierre Poilievre is focusing a lot of fire on David Eby because, one, I don't think he actually views Justin Trudeau as a real competition anymore on the national level. He's like 12 to 20 points ahead of the Liberals, so why bother talking about Justin Trudeau all day long? And also because I think that Pierre Poilievre wants to kind of shatter David Eby in British Columbia in order to kind of put to rest all of the sort of trendy, in vogue, radical left-wing policies by going after the main champion of them. And this is things like the carbon tax, decriminalization, defunding of the police, just lax policing laws. So he's going to go after David Eby, force David Eby to harden his resolve on these radical policies, and have David Eby basically destroy himself before the next BC provincial election. All other premiers, NDP, Liberal, Conservative, quasi-conservative like Doug Ford, have all gotten behind Pierre Poilievre on many issues. They're not acting ideologically. They just realize that there is a strong consensus on a lot of these issues, like pausing the carbon tax or scrapping it altogether, getting rid of decriminalization, parental rights. So everyone's lining up behind Pierre Poilievre, especially knowing that he's probably going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. So why end up slapping at him? And now Pierre Poilievre is going after the one premier trying to resist him and effectively standing against common sense just to spite conservatives, standing up for the most radical policies that even he, a couple of years ago, had acknowledged were not working. David Eby flirted with getting rid of decriminalization, but because conservatives had basically also said that they want to see drug decriminalization end, now David Eby is like doubling and tripling down on it purely out of spite. David Eby is a very childish person. And previously, when Poilievre just simply asked him, hey, join the Axe the Tax movement, get rid of your provincial carbon tax, David Eby called the Axe the Tax movement his baloney factory campaign and effectively insulted everyone who was going to be voting conservative in BC, saying they were unserious and that he actually does a serious job as the premier of British Columbia, a job he is terrible at. And so that ended up hurting David Eby a lot in the polls. And now Pierre Poilievre is coming back for seconds and saying, hey, David Eby, have you ever thought of not decriminalizing drugs and not giving out safe supply drugs and, not almost intentionally poisoning your people through negligence? And now David Eby and his health minister are doubling down on their drug decriminalization policy, saying it's actually saving tons of lives. It's a great program. You're not giving it a chance. And no, just because the federal health minister is coming to our province to discuss our crazy policies does not mean that there's any sort of issues with them or anyway. So yeah, David Eby is shooting himself in the foot. Pierre Poilievre just keeps asking David Eby, would you like to shoot yourself in the foot? Would you like to allow John Rustad to win the next BC provincial election? And David Eby's like, of course I would, and just shoots himself again in the foot. It's such stupid politics. Pierre Poilievre yesterday had posted quite a bit about David Eby's policies. And he's tying Justin Trudeau to David Eby because Justin Trudeau is not a very popular figure, and David Eby is not a very popular figure. And by packaging them together, I think that Pierre Poilievre is effectively guaranteeing he might win up to 50% of the vote in British Columbia. But in this tweet, Pierre Poilievre said, Trudeau and the Liberals and Eby NDP finally forced to face the chaos and destruction their own actions have caused. We've warned of the crime and chaos caused by the radical NDP Liberal policies for years. Ban hard drugs, treat addicts, stop the crime, common sense. And in the aftermath of Pierre Poilievre highlighting the report that the decriminalization policies were failing and it was creating crazy amounts of chaos in British Columbia, David Eby is now hardening his resolve on why decriminalization is actually fantastic, even though British Columbia has become the drug overdose and death capital of Canada. They can say all they want about this is trying to keep people from dying, but the problem is when you lower the barrier to entry and you incentivize the behavior of using drugs by basically saying it's much safer than it is in other provinces because we will revive you on the streets, we will have safe supply services and all that, you can't be surprised that people start using hard drugs. And to rational people, that sounds insane. It doesn't matter what safety net there is, I'm not using fentanyl. but people react to incentives. And although you and I wouldn't do it, a lot of people would. David Eby knows this. This is why he even thought of getting rid of decriminalization, because it was creating so many new addicts. And now he is not willing to do it simply because Pierre Poilievre is now against it. And Pierre Poilievre, in this Czech News interview, I will link in the description below, then sort of solidified his point and made a very concise call at David Eby. This is going to be a campaign ad in British Columbia during the provincial election. Pierre Poilievre going after David Eby, and then all of David Eby's refusals to do the right thing.
I'm calling on Justin Trudeau and NDP Premier Eby to end the decriminalization and the tax subsidized drugs and immediately put all our resources into recovery and treatment that will bring our loved ones home drug-free. It's mayhem. After 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP, we have, people lying face first on the pavement, overdosing in all across Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland. We have children in our schools getting their hands on taxpayer-funded hydromorphone drugs, and we have a massive crime spree that Trudeau and the NDP have unleashed. Enough is enough.
Who could disagree with that? That is the most reasonable, common sense ask of Trudeau and David Eby. Trudeau's kind of been helping a lot of these pilot safe supply programs around the country, but in reality, actually, technically, mostly is David Eby's fault in British Columbia. Also, Doug Ford's allowing this in Toronto, so although he's a conservative, he's not acting very conservative. But yeah, David Eby, because he's 5 years old, is now going to say, well, Pierre Poilievre's baloney factory is just spitting out a bunch of stupid rhetoric about drugs, and he's making the topic sound so easy to solve or whatever. He's going to do all this stuff, and he's not going to get rid of this policy, which is going to make it the mainstay of his re-election bid. Everyone is going to know that David Eby refused to get rid of the carbon tax, refused to get rid of decriminalization, refused to get rid of safe supply, and they're going to vote for the BC Conservatives. Why do you think so many pollsters are showing the polling shifting towards the BC Conservatives, a party that basically didn't exist a year and a half ago, is now within 4 to 6 points of the BC NDP, depending on what pollster you look at. Yes, other ones show the BC NDP still further ahead, but it's usually like Leger or Research Co., who tend to have more of an urban bias for who they poll. It's not going to look like a 5, 6, 7 point lead for the NDP when the election gets closer and voters start getting serious about who they're going to vote for. The BC United have to go away in British Columbia. They're not helping things. They're just NDP light. If you're not for the NDP, you're for the Conservatives. There's no one saying, well, I want some decriminalization. I want some safe supply. I want some carbon tax. So the United represent nobody's real positions. And I think when BC Conservatives, or when sort of BC residents are have to seriously stare down the barrel of another 4 years of safe supply, decriminalization, carbon taxes, defunding of the police like David Eby's tried to do, they're going to go vote Conservative. So I urge you all, if you're in British Columbia, vote Conservative. Tell your friends to get rid of safe supply by voting for the Conservatives, because that's going to be the only way. It's great to see Pierre Poilievre actually girding up upstart Conservative parties like the BC Conservatives. I hope he does this elsewhere. And so when he is the Prime Minister of Canada, there is a complete blue wall across the country of real Conservatives, so that even if we wanted to move constitutional amendments, we could do it. If we wanted to get things done that need 2/3 of the provinces in agreement, we can get it done. Anyways, that should be it from me today, guys. If you want to donate to my legal fund, it's in the description below. It's the Give, Send, Go link. We have a billionaire Chinese developer suing us for defamation at the National Telegraph here. Defamation he cannot prove, and after 2 years has provided no evidence. We mentioned him in an article about Aaron O'Toole, and merely mentioned a Globe and Mail article about him. We effectively said nothing new about him that wasn't already in the Globe and Mail article, and yet he was trying to sue us for defamation for citing a source that had been published a year and a half before we had written our article that was only viewed by like 9,700 people. It's so pathetic, and it's cost me $29,000 just defending myself. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Vote British Columbia Conservatives.